Welcome back to another video on Gearsaw Studios, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build yourself a Ferris wheel. Additionally, it even comes with a ton of little things on the bottom, so that way it can be seamlessly incorporated into any nearby theme parks. So without further ado, let's investigate how we'd go about this. Starting off, we need to get ourselves an area where we're likely to have some attention, such as a city or a theme park. Unfortunately, my city is not quite large enough for something as big as this, and I don't exactly have a theme park, so random island I just made, here we go. Now, what we need to do is figure out where we actually want it to be, and how big is the base. The size of the base of the build will determine a lot, and it needs to be an odd number of blocks. So like this, every time we add a block to one side, we have to do it to the other. And here's the idea. We're going to have a flat part here, maybe a little bit of a desk so that way you can get tickets to actually get on. You know, Ferris wheels are not free. And then stairs on either side, and then the giant Ferris wheel above. So let's get down a nice little foundation. We can use something like andesite or some more blocks. Preferably things with stairs work better, but if you're able to make it work, full blocks are completely fine. This is just a simple foundation. We don't need to think too hard about it. While I was laying down this foundation, expecting completely stone, I realized something. Not all Ferris wheels need to be ultra modern, completely white, things like that. Instead, we could definitely jazz this up. Instead of doing andesite stairs, we could potentially try some very vibrantly colored checkerboards. Maybe not this specific kind of coloration, but that kind of idea. We want to make this a little bit more colorful, so scratch the idea about using stone. Instead, let's get out some very bright things. Of course, most of the time white concrete is better replaced with other things, but we could definitely do something like this, and you can see how this right here looks a lot more interesting. Let's use more vibrant things, and then let's set up a little stand right here. A little bit more indoors, glass in it, not some sort of pop-up. With our first thing here, we now have a ticket booth. And hooray, we can now get tickets so that way this thing can actually get repairs. And we have a little button on the side. Notice the alternating walls because this is supposedly fun coloration. I'm not entirely sure why this is considered fun, but okay. We have some beehives here. These would be filing cabinets, daily reports. And then we have a fern here, not entirely sure. And then we have an anti-stress mat. Notice the ceiling with all the stairs and very well lit. And yeah, we stand here and we give out tickets and such. And then we can leave. Notice how the roof is also striped between red sandstone and smooth quartz. Notably, both of them are their smooth variations, and they alternate between heights on the edges. That way, it just looks a little bit more interesting. Now, we actually need to have the line. And here's the design. We're going to be using chains between red nether brick walls. And the line doesn't need to be very wide. So here's the idea. We place down a grid of these, and then we connect them with chains to act as little barriers. And we'll have this all through the place to make as long of a line as we want. You could definitely make it have a mile-long length. I know a certain YouTuber would love that. But still, we should definitely have something where we go around and have a line. Because, of course, a mob at the front would not be fun, and we need some way to prevent people from skipping it entirely. Now, I've gone through and done a few more changes to prepare for the actual Ferris wheel. And you can see starting here, we actually have the line. Notice the chains, very simplistic path. We have some gravel in order to show a lot of people have been here. And then we added some black stone under each of the walls in order to make sure it looked like, actually there. Those little podiums. Then we have our generic mascot for this hypothetical amusement park. You're probably not going to care about him, but still, kids might love him. And of course, saying all heights are allowed. So let's go over here and completely ignore the barriers, some cherry bushes. You can always add landscaping to a build. And then we go up these stairs. I transitioned them back to stone and andesite. It was simply just a little too much on the eyes, especially if we were meant to be looking up at the Ferris wheel. And then our platform is significantly larger. That way we can actually fit this. Which means we're almost ready. Now, we need to learn a little bit of terminology and a tool in the description. We need to make a circle. However, in order to make a circle, we need to know the measurements. radius, if we assume this is the point, my cursor, this is the center, the radius is how far from the ground or from each side, and our diameter is from side to side. So let's keep that in mind. 70 diameter, which means the center of it would be about 35 blocks off the ground. Of course, slightly higher up, so that way we can fit carriages, but still, we need something like that. So let's choose a point and then tower up. And once we tower up, let's measure how tall our tower is. And then let's subtract, let's say, 5 from that. That is our radius. So say right here, let's subtract 5 from that, and then our Ferris wheel will go out in each direction. And remember, big ones are harder to do. And then we go to the description and click on the link tree. And we go to the shape generator in order to make sure our circle is completely mathematically accurate. So that way it looks nice and smooth. So let's do all that and see what we get. Right here, I have chosen the size for the Ferris wheel, and we can see it is 61 by 61, and using those descriptions, I managed to create, well, half a circle. So hooray, we have this. And notice how I've marked the central block. This is going to be where all the spokes, the little things that hold into the center of the wheel, are going to anchor. And then on the bottom, I also added these little pieces of gray concrete to be the beams that holds up the whole structure. They might not be in the right positions right now though. But anyways, I'll fix that eventually. For now, we just need to figure out where we want the wheels to actually be. Of course, if you do not have world edit like me, maybe build them in the right positions beforehand. But still, we have a circle here and we need 2 of them. One here and then one here. And make sure you're building them out of the colors you want. With our 2 wheels now right next to each other and properly placed, we can now worry about how we actually support this. And using that fancy generator again, here is how you do it. You get point A, so one of these blocks here, and then point B, one of these 2 blocks here. Notably, they're outside the circle, or at least, right next to it. You can see here, this is the outer bounding of one of the circles, which means these 2 blocks here correspond to that, and thus will not get in the way of anything. You just need to make sure your carriages will not intersect with this, otherwise your build will not look very functional. So now we have that. And assuming you copied me 1 for 1, where every single detail is identical, of course I don't recommend that, but if you somehow did, then we go 6, 12, 12, 6 and connect it right there. And then we'll thicken it up by a few blocks to make sure that it looks like it has some weight behind it. You need to make sure your builds look like they have weight behind it. Otherwise, they just look like drawings and such. You need to make them look like they're actually functional, like they could exist in real life. So this, way too thin. We need to make it nice and bulky, anchor it right there, and then we'll add all the spokes in a moment off of that. And of course, that is a lot more line generation, but there's a lot of ways we can make that simpler for us. Right here, we now have our supports onto the thing. You can see we still have the center marked, and we have a little circle here. This is just to make sure if we wanted to put a little design in the middle, we know where it goes. And now, here is going to be a very interesting part of the build. This right here can make or break it. I've looked at a lot of them. If you don't get this right, it can really hurt your build by a lot. So let's get out some orange concrete. We're going to probably use a bit of this, but this is not the main block. Figure out the middle, and we want to build a simple beam like this. And yeah, this was pretty easy. And then we go up and do the same thing. And this will be our first quadrant. And you can see here, what do you know? But now we need to build more of these supports. So we need one here, here, here. You can see how the cursor goes. Yeah, we need a lot of these. And these are called spokes on a wheel. And now, in order to make sure that this works, we might have to thicken up this by another block, by just outlining it with another block. So if it's a little bit too thin for your liking, just do that. Using that line generator and a little bit of math, I have now placed down some of the spokes, and you can see they're going to support a wheel. So yay! Now let's convert them all to the same color if you're using different colors for demonstrative purposes. So let's just put it as a color that it's going to be recognizable. They're all going to look the same by the end, barring the fact that they all have different shapes. Their coloration is going to end up the same, and we want this on both wheels. So you see this quarter, add it to this side, flip it upside down, add it to this side, add it to this side, and then copy it onto the second wheel. And then we'll have a bunch of spokes to work with, and thus we'll start having something a bit more interesting to look at. Now, with our mathematical measurements, aka just using that tool repeatedly, we now have ourselves all 16 of the spokes for the Ferris wheel. Only one side is done, and you can see it looks like one, and we could add our carriages. However, let's not. By the way, I also thickened this up by just making another circle, so that way there weren't any mathematical inaccuracies. So yeah, there's a 61 by 61 and then a 59 by 59 inside of it, and then I connected the two. But we have all that going, and barring the fact that this is sea lanterns, assuming this was gray concrete, you'd probably say, yeah, that's good, but let's not. Instead, let's have it with almost a tie-dye aesthetic, where it goes out radiating different colors. And of course, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, let's just do a rainbow. I think a rainbow is actually a bad choice for this. Because one, of course, they're incredibly common, but also, we can do a little bit better if we mix up the colors. So let's have a gradient, where we start with something like maybe pink, and then go to lime, we have light blue, things like that. And then we'll have another wheel inside of this to give it a little bit more support. Things like that will work very well. So yeah, let's think of it like that, and then don't just stick with concretes or something like that. Instead, let's look at what we have. So purple is a pretty limited color sometimes, but look, we have wool, we have concrete powder, we have concrete, and we have terracotta. That's pretty decent. Potentially you could use the glazed terracotta, wouldn't recommend it, and shulker boxes are just a bit too pricey for our budget. But still, if we look through here, we even have amethyst, a little bit too textured for our likings. We have magenta, we can merge colors. Say if we go to a purple to pink gradient, that would work. Still, look through your menu and see what colors you have access to, and then let's use them. And I also advise against using red for this one, or at least not predominantly, because red just doesn't have that many vibrant colors in this game, and redstone is just a little bit too accented. Look at how powerful it is. We don't really want to be using the reds because they're a little bit desaturated. After over an hour of ideation to make this work, I finally have a gradient here, where you can see it just goes through a bunch of different colors, where we start with snow because it's the brightest white, go through the pales, and then we go through a yellow to orange gradient ending with resin. Then, starting with packed ice, we go between a light blue to light green, then blue, then purple. Pretty simple. And then we just go through, do it each time, sometimes taking or adding blocks in order to make it work. And then for the concrete powders, we place string under them. For the outer shell, instead of white concrete, we've now used snow, which means this is a really cool looking Ferris wheel now. Additionally, the middle, the circle, I just put a creeper face. Notice how I texture it using various concrete powders rather than just concretes. And yay, this looks pretty cool now. We're just missing the carriages and yeah. Alright, so let's turn it back to day and let me explain. This is dark, really dark, and that's not good. So we need to figure out a way to brighten this up. And, well, this is a pretty late game build, so I'm going to say end rods are perfectly justified here. So, yep, let's use these. They're pretty much sodium lights, so yeah, they're just going to work. We go through, technically you could connect them like this, and that is a pretty cool effect. So actually, I'm going to do that. Intersperse these through the spokes, these little pieces, add them, connect everything. Make sure when I turn it to night, this whole thing is going to be bright. This, all darkness. Here, I want this to be the focal point of attention. Make me want to look at this without telling me. Essentially, pretty much place a light maybe like every 10 blocks on it. Alright, we can see all those end rods really made a difference. And now, this thing is nicely illuminated. For our final step, before we just go into vibrant visuals and look at it one last time, let's look at the carriages. And we can see it's a pretty generic design. You have it at the bottom. Yep, they usually are at the bottom. And then we have a little bit of a green accent to fit in with the creeper theming of this hypothetical theme park. Of course, we have seating in here, and we can look out. Then, for the actual ways they're held up, by the way, notice the end rods are on every prismarine resin brick, and then every purple concrete or equivalent. And then we have the snow holding it up. If it doesn't fit without destroying some of the Ferris wheel, I put a chain in. And if it just doesn't fit at all, I added a lot more blocks to make it look like it did. So yeah, it's not the cleanest build per se, but it gets the idea across. We just have all this snow, and then you can piece in the details. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how this one's meant to be balancing, but let's just trust the process. Stuff like that. But now, the build is complete, and we can look at it in vibrant visuals. With the tiny adjustment of adding some candles into the eyes of the creeper, we are now done with the build. It's very well lit, it looks fabulous at night, and well, it's just kind of cool to look at. It's not terribly difficult resource-wise. If you have a few tools and a calculator, you can build this really easily. And you could definitely incorporate this into a theme park, because notice how a lot of it is not about its ground footprint, it's a very thin structure, which means you could fit it into a lot of places, even though it might detract from other nearby builds, or really just don't place it near tall structures. If you keep it by some smaller structures and nearby things that actually look like they belong to it, like maybe some carousels, then this will be sure to be an amazing inclusion. And you can even put it in the middle of a city. Either way, enjoy the rest of your day. Gearsaw out.